This happened less than a year ago, in an isolated valley region, a terrifying event that still makes me shudder every time I look in the mirror. I want you to understand that this was a completely real experience of mine, not some blown-up urban legend, but a perfect trap set up with poison and psychological manipulation. There is a 10-hour blank space, completely empty in my brain, where memories were wiped clean like a digital tape, overwritten without a trace. It all started with me waking up in a shallow, sand-filled desert ditch, my body wearing someone else's expensive clothes, my wallet gone, and surrounded by a completely unfamiliar space. My cousin Nolan and I have been very close since childhood, both of us sharing a passion for exploring new experiences and enjoying backpacking together. The reason we were there was because Nolan accidentally scored 2 exclusive invitation tickets to experience a luxury camping service, also known as glamping. Located deep inside Death Valley National Park, it was a campsite completely isolated from the outside world, without a single bar of cell service, surrounded by large luxury tents, a crackling campfire, soft jazz music, and a free open bar for hard liquor. Our initial state was extremely excited and careless. We thought this was a safe paradise for the ultra-wealthy. So we just freely enjoyed ourselves without a single bit of defense. I remember it clearly. It was around 11 o'clock that night. Nolan and I were sitting and drinking beers at the central bar of the campsite when an older couple actively approached us to strike up a conversation. They were dressed extremely elegantly, exuding the distinct intellectual and wealthy vibe of the American upper class, with a sophisticated demeanor that immediately made the person opposite feel a sense of trust. The man introduced himself as Sterling, and the woman traveling with him was his wife, Evelyn. Sterling looked at the two of us, smiled, and pulled a small liquor bottle out of his jacket pocket. He said this was a premium vintage whiskey that was decades old, distilled by his own family, and he wanted to invite the two of us to try a glass. In the open and completely unguarded atmosphere of a party night deep in the desert, neither Nolan nor I hesitated to take the glasses from their hands and drain them to show respect to these polite elders. After we finished drinking, Sterling suggested inviting the two of us to leave the noisy main tent area to walk toward their private tent zone located in a secluded corner of the valley. He claimed that they had a very rare collection of antiquities on display there that young people passionate about exploration like us would definitely love. The decision to follow that old couple was the biggest mistake of my life, turning a fun camping night into a horrific nightmare with no turning back. The path leading into their private tent area became darker and more desolate by the minute, with the electric lights of the central area thinning out before vanishing completely behind the sand ridges. The lively jazz music from earlier faded and then cut out entirely, leaving nothing around us but the sound of the wind whistling through the bone-dry desert brush, creating a bone-chilling sense of loneliness. When we stepped inside their tent, I was incredibly astonished because it was unusually massive, arranged with many bizarre antiquities and small stone statues placed on wooden pedestals along the tent walls. Only about 15 minutes after sitting down on the chairs, my body began to experience extremely strange and terrifying symptoms. It was completely different from a normal drunk or high feeling, but rather a crushing heaviness that hit me, freezing my entire body. I realized my knuckles could no longer move as intended, and while my mind was still completely awake and conscious of everything around me, all my muscles went limp like a piece of cardboard soaked in water. I desperately tried to turn my head to the side to call out to my cousin for help, but I was horrified to discover that Nolan had disappeared from the tent at some point without my knowledge. In that suffocatingly quiet space, the only thing left was Evelyn standing against the light, smiling straight into my eyes with a gaze that was freezing and lifeless, like a hunter who had successfully trapped their prey. Sterling stepped toward me with slow, measured strides while I watched him in absolute helplessness. Unable to lift a single finger, he lowered his head, leaned close to my ear, and whispered a sequence of meaningless phrases in a flat, emotionless drone that sounded like a machine. Right after that, he placed a gold fountain pen with intricate engravings directly into my rigid palm. My memory cut off entirely at the exact moment I tried to look down at a blank sheet of paper already set on the wooden tabletop. Everything around me went dark instantly, exactly like a computer suddenly getting its power cord yanked out. It was a blank space of time that lasted for 10 consecutive hours without a single dream or any sensation of pain appearing. The data on my phone later proved that during that entire period of amnesia, my body was still moving and still operating the device to send out text messages. I opened my eyes when I felt the harsh desert sunlight glaring straight into my face, burning and stinging. My body at that moment was curled up in a shallow, sand-filled ditch surrounded by barren dirt and tumbling rocks. I immediately shoved my hands into my pockets to check them in a state of absolute panic. My entire wallet, my ID, and my car keys had completely vanished without leaving a single trace behind. A wave of terror shot straight down my spine when I looked down at the clothes I was currently wearing. It was not my t-shirt and jeans, but a tailored, extremely expensive dark navy suit. It belonged to a luxury fashion brand that a college kid like me had never even dreamed of owning. The most terrifying thing was that this unfamiliar suit fitted my body measurements flawlessly, as if it had been custom tailored just for me. I looked down at my feet and saw that my old sneakers were still there, but the shoelaces had been completely pulled out by someone at some point. And when I slipped my feet inside, I could feel that the insoles were soaking wet, even though everything around me right now was a bone-dry desert. Sterling stepped toward me with slow, measured strides, while I watched him in absolute helplessness, unable to lift a single finger. He lowered his head, leaned close to my ear, and whispered a sequence of meaningless phrases in a flat, emotionless drone that sounded like a machine. Right after that, he placed a gold fountain pen with intricate engravings directly into my rigid palm. My memory cut off entirely at the exact moment. I tried to look down at a blank sheet of paper already set on the wooden tabletop. Everything around me went dark instantly, exactly like a computer, suddenly getting its power cord yanked out. It was a blank space of time that lasted for 10 consecutive hours without a single dream or any sensation of pain appearing. The data on my phone later proved that during that entire period of amnesia, my body was still moving and still operating the device to send out text messages. I opened my eyes when I felt the harsh desert sunlight glaring straight into my face, burning and stinging. My body at that moment was curled up in a shallow, sand-filled ditch surrounded by barren dirt and tumbling rocks. I immediately shoved my hands into my pockets to check them in a state of absolute panic. My entire wallet, my ID, and my car keys had completely vanished without leaving a single trace behind. A wave of terror shot straight down my spine when I looked down at the clothes I was currently wearing. It was not my t-shirt and jeans, but a tailored, extremely expensive, dark navy suit. It belonged to a luxury fashion brand that a college kid like me had never even dreamed of owning. The most terrifying thing was that this unfamiliar suit fitted my body measurements flawlessly, as if it had been custom tailored just for me. I looked down at my feet and saw that my old sneakers were still there, but the shoelaces had been completely pulled out by someone at some point. And when I slipped my feet inside, I could feel that the insoles were soaking wet, even though everything around me right now was a bone-dry desert. Nolan and I returned home in a state of utter shock, carrying a heavy burden of psychological trauma. For weeks after that night, Nolan did not dare to turn off the lights when sleeping, and always woke up gasping in the middle of the night from recurring nightmares. As for me, I stood constantly in front of the mirror to check every scratch on my skin, and even went to the hospital for x-rays because of the terrifying anxiety that my body had been sliced open to harvest an organ. The most illogical and agonizing point about this entire situation was that none of the credit cards in our missing wallets were ever charged for a single dime by the perpetrators. The thieves who took our wallets clearly did not care about money, and they did not even bother to sell our expensive phones, choosing instead to dump them into a trash can after their task was completed. The motive of that old couple named Sterling and Evelyn clearly operated on a much more dangerous level. Far beyond a typical robbery on the desert road, they needed our bodies, they needed our identities, and they needed 2 flawless signatures written in a state of completely stripped consciousness to legitimize a massive conspiracy. It was the terrifying silence of the aftermath that drove me to find the truth, because I could not live my entire life with a 10-hour blank space of being controlled by someone else like a puppet. Exactly 1 week after that horrific night, I decided to drive back to that luxury glamping site in Death Valley alone to confront them. I found the operational manager of the campsite, describing the appearance of the old couple and the location of that hidden tent corner. The manager looked at me with a bizarre expression before flipping through the entire guest registration system. from the previous weekend to double-check. He firmly stated that there was absolutely no guest named Sterling or Evelyn who had ever registered information or checked in at this location. I frantically rushed toward the desert sand ridge, where that luxury tent had once stood to search for even the smallest clue. But right before my eyes at that moment was nothing but an empty, bare plot of land filled with dirt and tumbling tumbleweeds rolling with the desert wind. There was not a single trace of the antique collection, no stone statues, and not a single sign to prove that a massive tent had ever existed in that place. Our case officially hit a complete dead end when the police refused to waste time on a story that sounded like the hallucination of two drunk men. To this very day, I am still surrounded by bone-chilling questions every single time the night falls. What giant inheritance will did I actually sign as a witness for on that night, and who was it a trap for? Where is the mysterious man who is currently wearing my old clothes, carrying my wallet and my ID right now, and what is he doing? And the most horrifying thing of all is, did a part of my soul Ving Vian get left behind in that desert tent? My name is Chris. There are things that happen in your life that you intentionally bury in the darkest corner of your memory until someone accidentally brings it up. And that entire cold feeling down your spine from that night comes rushing back completely intact. That summer, I had just turned 17 years old. That was the period when I had to work the night shift at an old, deserted truckway station, isolated on an interstate highway, running right through the Arizona desert. To be honest, it was an incredibly boring and tedious job, but at that age, with no money and two strict parents who were always ready to go crazy if I was unemployed, I had no choice. This way station was a place that almost no one wanted to stop by, except for long-haul truck drivers who needed to check their certified weight before entering the next state line. It consisted of a small control booth made of armored glass, a row of high-pressure lights turned a murky yellow from being covered in desert dust, and a huge electronic scale set flush into the asphalt road. My job just revolved around sitting in the air-conditioned booth, watching the massive trucks lumber into the scale, pressing the button to log the weight on the computer, printing the invoice, stamping it, and passing it through the slot in the glass window to the driver. Most nights passed in absolute silence. The steady, dull hum of the old air conditioner and the loud chirping of crickets out in the sand layout were the only sounds keeping me company from 10 at night until 6 the next morning. The emptiness and the repetitive nature of this job gave me a false sense of security. I thought the worst thing that could happen here was just a drunk driver talking nonsense, or the computer crashing due to a power grid failure in the suburbs. It was the carelessness of a 17-year-old kid that made me let my guard down and walk myself straight into a situation that even now, I am still not completely sure if I ever truly escaped from. The clock on the wall read exactly 2 in the morning. That was the time when the desert became the coldest, and the darkness outside was so thick that even the high-pressure lights could not pierce through more than 10 meters. I was slumping my head over the desk, scrolling through my phone to kill time when the buzzer indicating a truck entering the scale rang. It was a long, dry, and ear-piercing beep. I raised my head and looked through the front glass pane. A battered container truck, its entire body covered in a peeling and patchy forest green paint coat, was slowly pulling into position. It did not turn on its headlights. Only 2 small amber demi-lights on the roof emitted a faint glow like the eyes of a night beast. The truck came to a complete stop on the scale, but its engine was still running, letting out a low, heavy rumble that vibrated the entire glass pane of my guard booth. I glanced at the computer screen to wait for the weight numbers to display. According to the standard procedure, the driver had to honk a short blast to signal they were ready, but this guy did not. The truck was terrifyingly silent. I slid the small glass window open, and a gush of hot, dry air with the pungent smell of old engine oil rushed into the room. A skinny, grayish arm reached out from the truck cabin window, passing a thick stack of shipping documents through the gap. The driver did not get out of the truck at all, and because the cabin was too high combined with the enveloping darkness, I could not see his face clearly. Only a baseball cap pulled down past his nose. I took the stack of documents, and it was ice cold with a very unpleasant moldy odor, like something that had just been dragged out of a long abandoned basement. I began to enter the shipment code into the system, and that was when the first anomaly appeared. The numbers on the screen displaying the truck's weight started jumping continuously in a frantic manner. Normally, the system only took about 3 seconds to lock onto a fixed number, but right now, the red digits on the large outdoor LED screen and on my computer were dancing back and forth without stopping. It shot up from 20 tons to 35 tons, then suddenly nosedived to 10 tons, and then jumped back up to 40 tons. It felt as if some massive force was continuously stomping and jumping on the scale. At the same time, from behind the armored steel container body wrapped tightly with large chains, I heard strange noises. I heard the sound of violent scratching. It was not the sound of metal expanding due to the night temperature, but the sound of fingernails, or something sharp, frantically clawing at the steel walls inside the truck body. The sound was rapid, desperate, and echoed through the stillness of the desert. I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. My 17-year-old brain immediately tried to rationalize the situation. The system must have glitched out after the dust storm this afternoon. There is no way a truck can gain and lose weight continuously like this. Or maybe this old driver is smuggling a large herd of live livestock like cattle or pigs from the border, and they are panicking, trampling over each other inside the container, which is causing the weight to shift constantly. Even though a sense of unease had begun to spark in my heart, I still decided that I had to finish the paperwork to get this driver to leave as quickly as possible. I did not want to get involved in any trouble at 2 o'clock in the morning. I stood up straight from my chair, feeling as if all the blood in my body had drained instantly to my feet. The surrounding space suddenly froze, turning ice cold. I stared fixedly out through the thick glass pane of the guard booth. The driver still sat completely still, like a statue inside the cabin, his skinny, grayish arms still hanging lifelessly out of the truck window without a single movement. There was absolutely no indication that he heard the horrific noise occurring right behind his own back. My survival instinct screamed at me, telling me to slam the glass window shut, lock the main door of the guard booth, and call the police immediately. But just as I was about to step back, the driver slightly tilted his head. He did not turn his face back to look at me at all. But I could clearly feel that he was watching me through the large rearview mirror of the truck. The faint blue light emitting from the computer screen cast onto me, making me feel like a prey exposed inside a glass display case for him to examine. I knew I was standing too close to a danger that I could not name, and everything had spun completely out of control for a 17-year-old kid. I shakily picked up the stack of documents, intending to reach my hand out to give them back to him and tell him to drive to the next way station because the system here was completely broken. But before I could even step close to the window slot, the entire row of high-pressure lights outside the way station abruptly shut off. The thick darkness of the desert instantly crashed down, swallowing the truck and my guard booth into a pitch-black void. Only the flickering, weak blue light from the computer screen remained, flashing the red digit 0 on the desk. Right after that, the engine of the container truck suddenly died out. An absolute silence enveloped the space, lasting for about 5 seconds, but to me, it felt as long as a whole century. I stood frozen in place, my breath catching in my throat, not daring to move even a single millimeter out of sheer terror. And then, amidst that terrifying stillness, I heard the heavy, clanking sound of iron chains coming from the back of the container truck. The lock of the large container door was being slowly undone by someone, or something from the outside. I backed away toward the rear of the booth, my back slamming hard against the cold concrete wall. My hands scrambled wildly under the desk to find the heavy tactical flashlight. The moment I flicked the flashlight on, sweeping a beam of white light across the guard booth window, I almost let out a scream. It was not a monster, nor was it the truck driver. Instead, 3 black SUVs, driving completely blacked out without any lights on, had silently pulled up and surrounded the truck out of nowhere. The doors of the SUVs flew open. A group of about 6 to 8 people stepped out. They were not wearing standard police uniforms. Every single one of them was dressed in pitch-black hazmat suits from head to toe, their faces covered by gas masks with twin circular reflective glass lenses. In their hands, they held strange equipment that looked like specialized audio recorders or frequency scanners, with long antennas aimed directly at the container. One of them, who appeared to be the commander, rushed toward my guard booth. He slammed his hand hard against the glass window and gestured for me to hit the deck. "Get down on the floor right now, do not look up." I immediately complied, my mind going completely blank with terror. I lay flat on the concrete floor, wrapping both hands tightly around my head. Through the narrow gap at the bottom of the control booth, I heard loud shouted commands in code, the violent clanging of metal, and a long, ear-piercing hiss coming from the truck. It was not a human voice, and it was not an animal either. It sounded like high-pressure air, forcefully venting through a narrow opening, accompanied by a heavy-frequency vibration that made my chest ache. About 10 minutes passed in that total chaos. After that, the noises began to fade away. The man from earlier opened the door to the guard booth and stepped inside. He pulled his gas mask down, revealing a stern, sweat-drenched middle-aged face. He looked down at me, trembling on the floor, revealing a silver agency badge concealed beneath his protective suit. He spoke to me in a flat, cold, yet authoritative voice. "Kid, your shift ends early tonight. Pack your things and leave immediately through the back door. Do not look back at the truck, and absolutely do not say a single word about what you saw tonight to anyone, including your parents. Act as if that truck never existed." I did not dare to ask a single question. I grabbed my backpack, immediately ran out the back door, got into my beat-up car, and slammed on the gas pedal straight toward home. I submitted my resignation letter at the way station the very next morning. I lied to my parents that I could not stand the harsh cold of the desert at night, and accepted a furious lecture from my strict father, but being scolded and having my allowance cut was 100 times better than ever. Stepping foot inside that terrifying glass booth again. It took many months later, as the horrific memories began to settle down, for my mind to start piecing together the entire sequence of events from that night. And the truth that I deduced on my own was far more terrifying than anything I had directly witnessed. If the electronic scale system of the station had not glitched at all, and the 0 digit displayed on the screen at that time was completely accurate, that meant that massive container truck, along with everything that was scratching and knocking inside the cargo body, had absolutely no physical mass in our world. What exactly were they? And who were those people dressed in pitch-black hazmat suits? Did they come to rescue the thing inside, or were they hunting and trying to contain it? I suddenly realized that the driver with the skinny, grayish arms sitting in the cabin had probably been dead long before that truck ever entered my way station. He was merely a lifeless corpse temporarily fixed to the steering wheel to guide the terrifying entity behind him to the exact destination it needed to reach. And that night, I was not just a night shift employee who accidentally encountered a routine equipment malfunctions. I was standing right at the boundary between this world and something that completely surpasses human understanding. Now, 10 years have passed since that fateful summer night. I have moved to live in a big city, thousands of miles away from the Arizona desert. But whenever I have to drive on the highway at night, when passing by the deserted truck way stations, sitting desolate under the dim yellow lights, I cannot help but glance into my rearview mirror. I am always afraid that I will see those two amber demi-lights looming and tailing right behind my car again. And I always wonder if the high-pressure lights had not suddenly shut off that night, if that group of people had not arrived just in time. Then the thing that stepped out of that armored container door after the clanking of the iron chains, what would it have looked like? I have always prided myself on being a rational man. As a financial risk assessor, my daily job is to sit in front of numbers, calculate probabilities, and eliminate any dangerous variables that could occur. I brought that same caution home with me, always making sure the security system worked perfectly. The windows were locked tight before 10 at night, and everything in this historic brick house in suburban Georgia was under control. But there was one variable I missed, a deadly error right above my head that I had no idea about for 2 whole months. It turned my good nights of sleep into a joke and turned my trust into a psychological scar that makes the first thing I do when entering any room look up at the ceiling. The incident happened right at the peak of last summer. It was a time so hot that even the night air became thick, and our house suddenly started having annoying little issues. Occasionally, a few cans of food in the kitchen pantry disappeared, or a few bottles of mineral water stored under the sideboard suddenly ran low, which I just assumed was my wife cleaning up, or the kids getting up for a midnight snack. Sometimes, at 3 in the morning, I heard very small clicking noises echoing down to the living room, a dry sound that I reassured myself was just the expansion of the old brick structure under the daytime heat of Georgia. My family had lived here for 3 years. My wife and 2 young daughters, one 7 and one 5, always considered this house a peaceful fortress, a perfect isolated home surrounded by thick green bushes and a fairly long distance from the neighbors. We loved the large red brick fireplace built against the living room wall, even though we never touched it in the summer and the iron screen was always kept closed. It was a symbol of warmth, the place where we took family photos every holiday. On that fateful night, everything still happened according to routine. My kids were fast asleep in their rooms, and my wife and I were sitting in the living room, enjoying some cool air from the air conditioner. The surrounding space was perfectly quiet, a fake calmness covering the whole house, hiding the fact that there was a terrifying danger breathing right behind those bricks. Everything began to shift on a Tuesday night in mid-July. It was around 1 in the morning, and I was taking off my glasses. Getting ready to turn off the bedside lamp and lie down, the bedroom door suddenly creaked open, and Chloe, my 7-year-old eldest daughter, stood there with a deathly pale face. She wasn't crying, but her tiny hands were gripping the hem of her nightgown tightly, her eyes wide with pure terror. "Daddy, there is a really strange noise down in the living room," Chloe said in a whisper, barely making a sound. I got out of bed, knelt on one knee to match her eye level, and gently brushed her hair. "What kind of noise, sweetheart? It might just be the wind or some tree branches brushing against the window," I reassured her in the lowest, most calming voice I could manage. "No, Daddy, it feels like someone is scratching inside the wall, right behind the fireplace," Chloe told me with a trembling voice and pointed toward the staircase. The rational mind of a risk assessor immediately kicked in to find the most logical explanation. During the harsh summer in Georgia, raccoons or woodpeckers usually look for dark, hollow spaces to escape the brutal heat, and the abandoned chimney flue of an old brick house is the perfect spot. I told Chloe to crawl into bed next to her mother and said I would go downstairs to check things out so she could sleep peacefully. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight from my desk and stepped out of the room. As I walked down the wooden stairs, the house was so silent that I could clearly hear the steady hum of the air conditioning system. The living room was swallowed by darkness, with only the faint street lights cutting through the window blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I approached the brick fireplace, turned on the flashlight, and shined it directly at the dusty iron screen. Nothing seemed unusual from the outside, but right as I turned my back to leave, a strange sequence of noises started again. It was clearly the sound of heavy fingernails scratching against the bricks inside, very slow but entirely intentional. Then came a metallic shifting and clanking sound, like a strong force was trying to manipulate the iron bars fixed inside the chimney. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up because I knew a wild animal would never make such a structured, calculated pattern of noises. I switched off the flashlight so I wouldn't startle whatever was inside, then knelt flat on the wooden floor, pressing my right ear close to the gaps of the iron safety screen. I held my breath, focusing all my hearing into the dark, deep void that stretched straight up to the sky behind the brick wall. The scratching abruptly stopped, giving way to a dead silence that lasted for about 5 seconds, and then, from deep within the chimney flue, a cold draft carrying a foul stench blew straight down against my ear. Along with that draft came a deep, heavy intake of breath, followed by a long exhale, the distinct wheezing sound of human lungs. It was the breathing of someone standing straight in the dark, right above my head, trying to regulate their breath in that tight space. As I recoiled, my flashlight accidentally struck the iron frame of the fireplace, letting out a loud clank. Immediately, the heavy breathing from deep inside the chimney cut off, and the living room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. That silence did not last long because a split second later, an angry, guttural snarl echoed down, followed by a violent kick from within that shook the entire brick structure. Soot and chunks of old mortar cascaded onto the hardwood floor, and I knew the most dangerous variable had just breached my home. Primal terror surged through me, sending my heart into a frantic race as I spun around toward the stairs and screamed at the top of my lungs to wake my wife. "Lock the kids' bedroom door right now. There is someone inside the house," I yelled with all the strength I had. my voice cracking from sheer panic. When I whipped my head back toward the fireplace, the heavy iron safety screen was violently thrown forward onto the floor by a horrific force from within. Out of that tight, pitch-black opening, a gaunt figure in tattered clothes covered in thick black soot began to slide down aggressively. The intruder revealed himself as a wild-looking man with matted hair and wide, bloodshot eyes fixed on me with pure malice. He lunged out of the ashes with a terrifying animalistic speed, completely cutting off the main staircase that led to my wife and daughters. The house, which had been our safest fortress, was instantly inverted into a lethal trap with no way out. I had no time to process or calculate my options. My only objective now was to draw him away from the stairs. I grabbed a heavy wooden dining chair nearby, stepped forward, and rammed it with all my might directly into his torso to hold him back. The impact caused him to stagger back a few paces, buying me a few seconds of incredibly precious time. In that exact window, my wife sprinted down the stairs carrying our youngest, her other hand tightly dragging Chloe, who was sobbing in sheer terror. "Run to the back deck glass door. Get outside right now," I roared, pushing my family toward the sliding door that led to the outdoor balcony. I used the full weight of my body to press against the tempered glass sliding door that led to the balcony. My wife and 2 little ones were already behind my back, the coldness of the night wind outside doing nothing to cool down the sweltering heat of panic. Right when the door was just latched, that man rushed forward and slammed his entire body into the glass. The thick-tempered glass panel let out a dry vibrate, feeling as if it could shatter instantly under that frantic impact. He did not stop but began using his gaunt, soot-covered fingers to scratch and punch repeatedly at the glass surface. His eyes were turned inside out, stark white, and locked tightly onto my eyes through the separating glass, his mouth continuously twitching to roar out meaningless sounds. Thick black soot streaks mixed with streaks of blood from his torn fingernails began dragging into long smears across the clean glass. I had to brace my legs firmly, both hands gripping tightly onto the metal handle, my teeth gritting together so hard they made a grinding noise to keep the door from popping its latch under his force. "Gia, call the police right now. Call 911 quickly," I yelled loudly toward the back without daring to turn my head. My eyes still locked onto every movement of the perpetrator. Behind me, the sound of my wife sobbing while shaking as she dialed the phone, and the 2 kids holding tightly onto their mother's legs as they wailed. The intruder seemed to have a frantic fountain of energy that knew no exhaustion, as he began using his forehead to smash repeatedly against the glass. Every single strike of his was another time my heart tightened, and I had already prepared myself that if this glass broke, I would have to throw myself into a full-blown fight with him to protect my family. Time then passed so slowly that I felt as if a century had gone by, the muscles in my shoulders and arms beginning to give out and shake violently. Right when I thought I could no longer hold my ground, the red and blue emergency lights swept through the bushes outside the yard. 2 suburban police officers with tasers in hand rushed in from the living room side door, shouting out commanding orders. The madman whipped around, but before he could react, he was struck by the current from the fired taser, his body convulsing violently before crashing down onto the hardwood floor. The police quickly moved in to cuff his hands tightly behind his back and pinned his soot-covered face flat against the floor. Only when he was tossed into the back seat of the patrol car did I dare let go of the glass door, my entire body collapsing onto the balcony floor from exhaustion. An hour later, I, along with 2 police officers and a repairman, conducted an inspection of the entire inside structure of the brick fireplace. When the repairman used a high-powered flashlight to shine up from the mouth of the fireplace into the deep chimney flue, all of us could not help but shudder. The intruder had used angle iron bars to drive deep into the brick joints inside the wide chimney flue to create an incredibly sturdy support system. On those iron bars, he placed wooden planks to serve as a place to sleep and live for over 2 months, right above our living room ceiling. The police found an old backpack containing empty food cans, mineral water bottles stolen from my kitchen, and a small flashlight. More horrifyingly, in a dark corner on the brick wall inside, he had used tape to stick up photos taken secretly of my 2 daughters playing out in the yard. The police chief patted my shoulder and said that he was a homeless man with a history of severe violence who had just escaped from a shelter in the neighboring state. He had stalked this house since the beginning of the summer, discovered the abandoned chimney system, and turned it into his own territory to wait for the right moment to strike. The very next morning, I packed up our most essential belongings and took my family away from that house. We rented 2 adjoining rooms in a hotel in the center of town and stayed there for a full month. My wife could not fall asleep unless the lights were turned on bright, while my 2 kids continuously woke up in the middle of the night, screaming and refusing to look at any dark corner in the room. Every time they saw a long shadow cast on the wall, they cringed in sheer terror. Myself, a man who always believed in data and the safety I established on my own, was also severely traumatized. I realized that the concept of a peaceful fortress was just a ridiculous illusion. My absolute trust in the house completely collapsed, replaced by a lingering sense of doubt and suspicion toward every physical structure around me. During the time my family stayed at the hotel, I hired a construction crew to come to the house to completely eliminate the source of the nightmare. I demanded they dismantle the entire brick base of the old fireplace in the living room. After that, a concrete mixer truck was brought in to pump tons of solid concrete from the top of the chimney down, completely filling that dark void from top to bottom. We plastered it flat and repainted the wall, turning what used to be a fireplace into a flat, solid brick wall with not a single gap left. I also spent a large amount of money to upgrade the entire security camera system, adding motion sensors in every corner inside and outside the house. When autumn came, the sweltering air of Georgia cooled down, and we finally decided to move back into the old house. Our family life gradually returned to its normal routine. My kids have started to sleep in their own rooms, and my wife no longer startles every time she hears the wind blowing through the trees outside. However, the unbroken peace of the old days is gone forever. Now, right at 1 in the morning, I wake up according to an unconditional reflex. I lie frozen in the dark, holding my breath and trying to strain every sense to catch the smallest noises of the house. Even though I know the old fireplace is now just a solid block of concrete, I cannot stop myself from looking up at the ceiling every time I walk through the living room. I realize the brick void above our heads has been filled, but the peace in my mind has been stolen forever by a wheezing breath in the dark.